Foxtel is slashing prices as FreeviewPlus finally launches.
Smartphone explosion. Should you buy Apple or something else? Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who's far too smart to get up early for damned iPhone launches. Adam Turner. Adam, what's happening in tech news?
Australia's community television networks will definitely be taken off the air at the end of 2015, with Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull confirming that they'll be moved across to the internet. The spectrum that they were using was once earmarked for a sixth television network, but will now be auctioned off to the telcos.
It's rumoured that Microsoft's about to buy Mojang, makers of Minecraft, with a deal expected to be announced by the end of this week. The price for all that block building fun? A rumoured cool $2 billion.
Australians who rely heavily on virtual private networks should be considered likely pirates, according to the BBC's submission to the copyright inquiry. The BBC wants Australian internet service providers to treat heavy VPN users as suspicious in their hunt for illegal downloaders.
Telstra and Optus are fighting it out to get new customers to their networks to switch across, offering a variety of lucrative trade-in deals and bonuses to customers in order to try and entice them to break contract. They're tempting sounding offers, but I'd suggest you read the fine print, because if you've got more than a few months to go on your contract, it could actually end up costing you more than it saves. So Adam, there's a lot of movement in the entertainment industry, with Foxtel cutting prices and FreeviewPlus launching. What's the deal?
Well, I think Foxtel cutting prices is a bit more exciting than FreeviewPlus launching, but I'll get to that in a second.
I think I agree.
Yeah, the big news here is that Foxtel is cutting $25 a month from its basic plan. This is the plan that you have to pay for before you pay for anything else. So they're basically halving the price of that. It's cutting at least $25 a month off every Foxtel subscription. Now, considering that they've struggled for years to get above about 30% penetration in Australian homes, and price has been the big barrier, this is a big deal for Foxtel. And it will be interesting to see whether it can actually help get it into more homes. It'll also be interesting to see if there's an on-flow effect from this, and next year maybe they drop the price of Foxtel Play for online subscription.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because it's only relatively recently that Foxtel's actually been profitable. And it makes you wonder, can they continue to be profitable when they're chucking $25 away a month from customers in order to entice them?
Well, I think the thing is that they've seen the writing on the wall. And in some ways, we're lucky that Australia had the fibre to the premises debate, even though it looks like in the end that we're not going to all get fibre to the premises. Because I think that's what inspired Foxtel to get off its arse and do something. A couple of years ago, you'd never believe that it would have been something like Foxtel Play available without a home Foxtel subscription. You wouldn't have believed even maybe 12 months ago that Foxtel would slash $25 off every subscription. But when it looked like every home was going to get fibre to the premises, Foxtel started to think, right, we've got to move with the times. If they had have known back then that we were going to get the hodgepodge mess that it looks like we're going to get now, they might have slacked off a little bit. So it's kind of worked out well that way. The other interesting thing is that Foxtel's getting ready to be an internet service provider as well, so they can bundle your internet, your pay TV, and your home phone all in the one bill. That's going to be a big deal.
That's bundling Telstra, though, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of the equivalent of what Telstra already does.
Well, no,
Foxtel,
it won't be bundling Telstra, though. That's the thing. Is I think what Foxtel's hoping to do is eventually get their internet wholesale from the NBN, because at the moment Foxtel's deal with Telstra is that Foxtel cannot set itself up as an ISP unless it's wholesaling from Telstra. But Telstra and the NBN are about to sign a deal about what happens with the copper network and the cable network. Now, if that gets handed over to NBN Co, then there's no way that Foxtel can be expected to stick to that deal and get the wholesale from Telstra when Telstra's no longer a wholesaler. So that takes Telstra out of the picture, and Foxtel can just deal straight with NBN Co like every other internet service provider.
Certainly, but my point was, if you wanted that kind of service, you could currently get it from Telstra. I think it'll be really fascinating to see where Foxtel competes on price and perhaps data with what Telstra is already pitching.
Yeah, it does give them flexibility there, because they can sell basically the internet for free as a loss leader for pay TV, or pay TV for loss leader for the internet. It does give them some flexibility, and that's sort of going to strain that relationship with Telstra. But hopefully competition will be a good thing, and we'll see some good deals out there.
What do you reckon the odds are that Foxtel is going to be watching the torrenting activity of its broadband users?
Oh, yeah. If you're a BitTorrent fan, there's no way in hell I'd be going on Foxtel. What they say in public might be one thing, but privately I wouldn't go about it. It was interesting what was in the news about the BBC reckons that people using VPNs should be cracked down on, which is a bit odd because people using VPNs aren't likely using it for BitTorrent. They're more likely to use it to stream from things like Netflix or BBC iPlayer. That's not technically piracy.
There's your answer right there. There's your answer right there. iPlayer should only be free for people in the UK. That's not BitTorrent piracy, but it's still piracy. It's still illicitly accessing. They are blurring the lines, but it's still their content to deliver. I think they've got a certain point there. I think they're almost certainly wrong in a lot of cases because obviously there are hundreds, if not thousands, of legitimate uses for VPNs as well that could chew up huge chunks of data.
Yeah, they'll never be able to block VPNs.
That remains to be seen.
Or they'll block too many legitimate business users. There's no way they could do it. But the BBC says if you're downloading too much for a VPN, that's basically one strike against your name and you look very suspicious. The other thing that's happened... Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of things which seem a little disappointing, FreeviewPlus has launched.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is how a segue is done. That was beautiful.
Absolutely smooth.
Yes, more of a whimper than a bang, really. One of the big surprises is that only Sony and LG made it to the list of FreeviewPlus certified devices. A lot of people were expecting Panasonic to be on there as well. Panasonic already has compatible TVs on the market. Panasonic's been closely involved with the development of FreeviewPlus in Australia.
But those are HBB TV compatible TVs. They're not FreeviewPlus badge TVs, are they?
Yeah, but Panasonic has been working closely with Freeview to get all this stuff to work. And Panasonic have been used as the reference devices to get it to work. And the reason why they're not on the certified list is less to do with whether or not the televisions are doing the job right, and more to do with the fact that Panasonic and Freeview couldn't strike a back-end deal on things like limiting fast-forward speeds on PVRs and stuff like that. And if you don't play by those rules, then Freeview won't let you play the game at all. So it's kind of frustrating for a lot of people out there. And then I tested a Panasonic television, and the results were not as great as you'd expect. And a few people in the industry said to me off the record that there's something not right there and they need to sort it out. But of course, when you take that up with Freeview,
I think you just made that comment on the record there, sir.
I didn't say who it was that told me, though. But then when you take that up with Freeview, they say, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything because you're not using a certified device. So there's only a handful of LG and Sony TVs which need to get a firmware update that are certified by Freeview, so it'll be interesting to see if they handle it any better than the Panasonic devices, but it's still going to be a long time. Freeview has this idea that 10% of Australian homes will have access to FreeviewPlus in 12 months time. That's a bit crazy. Not that many people upgrade their TVs every year, and even if they do, they don't necessarily buy these handful of LG and Sony TVs, so I think it's going to be a slow burn for a long time. And when Nine's more interested in Streamco and the others are more interested in their other deals, you got to wonder how much effort they're going to put into FreeviewPlus when practically no one can watch it. So, Alex, you dragged yourself out of bed at the butt crack of dawn in order to see what Apple had on offer. Did you like what you see?
The butt crack of dawn is not a pretty time. Not a pretty time. But that being said, yeah, look, there's some interesting stuff that Apple's announced. The brief run through, there's two new iPhones, the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus, both of which have larger screens. That's the big sales feature, and Apple are kind of quietly ignoring that they used to rubbish the idea of big phones. But I think they've kind of realised that an awful lot of consumers were jumping on to Galaxy S5s and HTC One N8s and all sorts of other larger screen devices, and they probably did need to play in that space. The other thing that they announced in a hardware sense, which we won't actually see on store shelves until at least early next year, is their first wearable, the Apple Watch. Now, that to me is a bit more of a mixed bag. The user interface looks quite interesting and the design is really quite nice. But having said that, they've got three different variants on this thing. They've got the Apple Watch, they've got the Sports Apple Watch, and they've got the Apple Edition Apple Watch. And they've only announced pricing for one model at $349 US. Presumably that's the Apple Watch because the Edition one is like rose gold and very fancy.
Yeah.
So it's only going to go up from there, which means they are sitting at a price point that's at least $50 to $100 more than everyone else for a watch that by and large so far does the same things that everyone else does. We're still talking notifications. Yes, you can talk to it with Siri, but you can talk to an Android Wear watch with with Google Now and so on.
Yeah.
So it's still it's a similar kind of play. Now, Apple being Apple, yes, it's got that certain kind of Apple flair to it. As I said, I think it's a really nice looking device. And they may well be able to pull it off where others haven't in this kind of premium watch price space. That having been said, also they were kind of reticent, and even the stuff they've got out post keynote doesn't really talk about the battery life, which is always the killer with any smartwatch.
That's gonna suck, and it's gonna really screw up the battery life on the iPhone as well. I reckon. If it's anything like the other Bluetooth 4 devices I've seen, they really kill your battery.
Bluetooth low energy is not that bad in my experience, but they certainly don't help. Let's put it that way. The backdrop for all of this, though, is that actually there's this whole flood of phones coming. Now, Apple, admittedly, is going to be first out the gate. The iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus are going to go on sale in Australia on the 19th. Mm-hmm. And as yet, there's a whole bunch of new phones which were just announced at IFA the week before, where we don't have concrete release details besides they'll be available for the end of the year. Samsung's announced its big new phone, and we are really talking big because it's their new Note. In fact, it's two new Notes. You've got the Note 4 and you've got the Note Edge. The Note Edge's big cool feature is that it's rounded at the side for an extra little row of icons on the screen, which is kind of cute and quirky. I don't know if it's actually going to take off, and they haven't actually announced pricing for that one. So, sticking with Samsung, they've also got their new smart wearable, the Gear S. Now, this isn't an Android Wear device, it's a Tizen one, but it's got a SIM within it, so you don't actually need the phone part if that's what you really want. If you want the full-on Inspector Gadget meets Dick Tracy experience, then the Gear S is probably as close as you're going to come this year. Sony also announced a new set of phones, the Xperia 3 and the Xperia 3 Compact, and its first Android Wear smartwatch, the uniquely named Smartwatch 3. Someone really got creative in the marketing department there. Yeah. But there's all these new devices coming, and they're all kind of hitting the same kind of thing. Apple is actually nudging into this market. Now, again, Apple being Apple, there are people I know who sit firmly in the Apple camp and wouldn't have anything else. There are people who sit firmly in the Android camp and who can gleefully say, well, we've had big phones and we've had NFC and we've had all this other stuff for some time now. And yeah, they're right. To a certain extent, you've got to ask, well, what's been done with some of that? Not so much the large screen, but stuff like NFC. Because the other thing that Apple announced was Apple Pay, its first push into payments.
That's going to blow the others out of the water. Android's been so fragmented with stuff like that, and Windows Phone as well. It hasn't done a lot with it. Apple's got partnerships with Visa, MasterCard and American Express from day one, and it's just gonna... in America, the contactless payments aren't as popular as they are here. So Apple had to explain you can use it at McDonald's, you can use it at the Disney store, not because they've done any deals with those stores, but because they're the stores that actually have things like PayWave and PayPass that a lot of Americans haven't even heard of. So hopefully that puts us up the front for who gets it next, because the contactless payments are fairly well established here, so you can walk into most shops now. If there's no other special thing that's needed, no special Apple reader, which I was worried there might be, but there's not meant to be an Apple reader or anything special, hopefully they'll be able to roll it out here quite smoothly, and I'd say within about 24-48 hours Apple Pay will have more users than all the rest of them put together.
I suspect you're right, and certainly obviously because they're not even launching Apple Pay in the States till October, and they haven't announced a time frame for when they're going to launch it here, and I guess they probably do have to cut a few deals with a few banks and talk to the local branches of MasterCard and Visa and so on. They'll have a user base, and you're right, all that infrastructure will be there. There is some interesting stuff in there as well. It sets up apparently a one-time passcode for each transaction, so even if you lost your phone, then you're still okay. I think though it's still just going to be one digital wallet amongst many. I've seen this argument floating around that Apple's going to totally dominate this industry and become the standard. Well, I don't think they are, simply because they're never going to have 100% market share, and unless you can convince a Visa or a MasterCard to suddenly start handing out iPhones instead of handing out physical credit cards, no merchant's going to say, oh, well, I'll only take Apple Pay. No, sorry, you've got a Samsung phone, I don't want your money.
Yeah, but the nice thing is that it looks like Apple's not as reliant, like I said, on particular hardware. It's not like, oh, we only accept Samsung or we only accept PayPal. Anywhere, it looks like anywhere that will accept something like PayPass or PayWave should work with Apple, but because they have so low penetration and awareness in the US, Apple will push Apple Pay as the de facto term, which means PayWave or PayPass. And so everywhere will say we are Apple Pay compatible. With what they really mean is we have PayPass and PayWave as well. But because they've made an early move there, it's going to get a lot of higher penetration, where here it'll just sort of blend in with everyone else. But it's not a specific Apple wallet that only works with Apple stuff. If it really works anywhere where I can take my Visa card, then it's going to do well, I reckon.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a really good kind of kick up the bum for the payments industry.
Yeah, it's a massive shot in the arm, yeah.
Your credit card never actually goes flat, so I don't anticipate that we won't be carrying credit cards for some time to come.
Well, that about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold, and I'm off to write a few more gadget stories while the early bird over here catches a well-deserved nap.